This podcast is supported by Siemens, your partner for industrial-grade AI.
Hello everybody and welcome to a new episode of our Industrial AI podcast. My name is Robert Weber and it's a pleasure to talk to
Peter Seeberg. Good morning, Robert. How are you?
I'm fine, Peter. What about you?
I'm just fine. As you suggested, I'm traveling. I'll tell more about that later on. Yes, it has to do with wonderful slogan about AI needing creative humans, but more to that at the very end.
We have a lot of news. Let's get started, Peter. I like to start with robotics and DeepMind, and I found a very interesting article and I have a quote. Together with 33 academic labs, we pooled data from 22 different robot types to create the OpenX embodiment dataset and RTX model. And the question then, what if we could combine the knowledge across robotics and create a way to train a general purpose robot? So that's the foundation model we always talk about, and now DeepMind is going this way for robotics.
So it's a typical, what should I say? It sounds again like, is it an open source / I don't know, doing something together for the world, right? You're the specialist on that. That means that if one, as we talked about, last week, Saudi, BMW, so they produce, I don't want to move away to that, but it's a similar topic, isn't it? It's like one company moving forward and maybe already from the very beginning with many, many persons, listeners of us, which in their free time or maybe partly also paid for by their employer, and together they work on something which then not only Google DeepMind in this case, or last week BMW, Saudi, or whoever, but the world can make use of it. That's the base idea behind it, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm very proud because the University of Freiburg is part of this group led by DeepMind. So we should talk a little bit about that with Frank Hutter. Maybe he can tell us some more at our event. But I think, it's a very interesting approach. Foundation models, big models, general models are coming. And it's very interesting that the robotics speed up this topic, right?
Yeah, models won't go away. We'll talk about more of them today again as well.
Yeah, I will put the link to the whole article and to some very impressive videos into the show notes. And then I have one more news. With Andrew and Google offer a new course for beginner. It's called the AI pair programming and with LLMs. And Andrew's quote was, AI pair programming is being rapidly adopted by developers to help with tasks across a tech stack, from catching bugs to quickly inserting entire code snippets. And the course is free. It takes you 1 hour to do the course, and it's in collaboration with Google. And I think it's very interesting to learn more about pair programming with LLMs. Very interesting. That's what we always talk about, LLMs, pair programming. Very interesting.
Yeah. I think what pair means is very much similar like the Copilot, right? So using, as we've always been saying, correct, AI is a tool and you can use a tool. It's interesting that like half a year ago when we talked about it, and I do have a piece on this topic as well. There was still a shitstorm, from the coding community, which is not anymore, I should say, today. I'm very interested that Andrew is doing that. There was one, Andrew does this weekly mailing list, and there was actually one time, in a very diplomatic way, I said I wasn't sure I agreed with him, where he was giving an example where it's still important to learn. So what he says specifically, if he wants to do a summary of every letter that he's ever written in his newsletter, he can copy paste the letter at one at a time into a large language model, ChatGPT, and ask for a summary. But it would be much more efficient for him to write a simple piece of code that iterates over all letters in a database. Now, I say, why would I program a piece of code if I can ask a large language model to do what I need? Now, there was no shitstorm. There were only 2 comments. It always depends on the time of the day that you post something like that. So anyway, very important, dear listeners, do not misunderstand me. Why we will continue most certainly to need programming skills at least also for the background to make all of this wonderful AI, machine learning, large language models work, it is my firm belief that large language models will provide consumers with capabilities that in the past required programming skills, right? So please do continue to work as a Python or different programmer. Do not misunderstand.
Yeah, sure.
Or even do start learning to code if that's what you want to do. That's not what I'm saying, right? But at the same time, I say to other listeners who are not programmers, keep your eyes open.
Yes.
Look what's happening, day-to-day developments in the large language model space. And guess what? A day later, there's a guy called Carsten Ulrich. He's a senior director of artificial intelligence, and he shares a thing called Open Interpreter. It's a package that interacts with GPT-4 or LLMs and provides a natural language interface to your computer's general purpose facilities. What he says is like, for instance, you can ask it to convert all PPTs, think of a newsletter, in the current directory into a PDF. And then, this is very important, it will then write the Python code it needs to execute a task.
Wow.
This was only 24 hours after I wrote it, right? So anyway, still, nevertheless, happy coding to you coders. I really mean that sincerely. I've been coding myself in the past, 40 years ago. But also at the same time, happy using large language models for you listeners that are non-coders.
I have one more quote on LLMs because Jan LeCun was in Munich and he held a presentation, and it's very interesting because one headline was auto-regressive LLMs suck. You saw that?
Yeah, I saw that.
And he said, auto-regressive LLMs are good for writing assistant, first draft generation, stylistic polishing, code writing assistance. And then he had a big list of what they're not good for. It's producing consistent answers and stuff like that. And the conclusion is, we are easily fooled by their fluency, but they don't know how the world works. That's very interesting. And now he's on the same track as Gary Marcus, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, but still, I'm not sure that you can use that quote just full stop like that. It completely depends on what you want to get out of them.
Yeah.
And as long as we have been looking at the large language models as an alternative for search engines, yeah, sure. And from that perspective, I strongly, completely agree. Whatever, we need to get the hallucinations out of the large language models, right? I mean, and everybody's working on that. So that's perfectly okay. But what did I just share? I mean, what is happening in our world of productivity? We already today can use the large language models in a way that gives us a lot of productivity improvement. So it always depends a lot on what you need them for, right? By the way, if I can take it over from here for
sure.
two things. So one is, and it's all related, of course, again. In this case, I started looking into vector databases. I wasn't sure that I'd heard about him, and I'm not sure that this topic I'm going to dig deeper into. I was going to check it with you, but I'll just share it with you now and also with our listeners for our industrial AI podcast, right? Because, so in preparing for updating my files for the German Organization of Engineers, VDI, it's a VDI Data Science Engineer course I'm doing. A little bit more about that later. I signed up for a YouTube video by a company called Essentry. In German, it's about implementing using ChatGPT in your company. Just one great example again of what you can very, very well do today already, in which they show how to have ChatGPT access a vector database and get a result for which you would normally, in a bigger company, you would ask your business or analyst, right? You would ask, can you please check for me what was last month's revenue of my, product manager, product X. Now, what they do is they show with a retrieval plugin, in this case, it's the Pinecone vector database. And that made me think, if companies in the future shall be moving from standard, I'm not a specialist on databases, but let's say SQL databases to vector databases, that is already maybe in itself a wrong question, but as far as I understand the topic at the moment. And the question then is, can large language models only access vector databases and provide answers to a non-data scientist like the one I just said? So what is all the talk about the vector database? And then I won't go further into it. And depending on if you listeners say, yeah, that's a great, important topic, do more about it. Or maybe it will go away again because it's about, no, it could be that it's exclusively for business intelligence, like what I just said. But let's see. Maybe we're going to find that's important for us as well. A quick intro. A vector database is, a database system designed to handle vectors. Vectors, what is the talk about these vectors? All the stuff we talk about since a year now, large language models, generative AI, they all rely on what is called vector embeddings. So there's like algorithms that are called like word to vec, and they put words like, Robert, Peter, or whatever into vectors. And the way to think about it is maybe in the 3D space. I believe it happens in like 100 or more dimensional space, which is very difficult for us humans to imagine. But if you imagine like a 3D space in colors, like RGB colors, and we can all understand that in this 3D world, we look at it, that all variations of green are somewhere sitting close together, right? And in the same way, the word Paris will sit close in some kind of dimensional space to the word Eiffel Tower. That's the way to think of it. I won't do more than that. And then I'm going to have a talk with Tobias Stringman. He just said he doesn't have time, but I'll still look into that. And I did already have a preliminary answer as well, because there was Mundhar, if I pronounce that correctly, Mundhar Al-Shabi, he's machine learning architect, delivery here in Berlin. And he shared a vector database comparison, which is by Emil Fröberg. There's a couple of names, Pinecone, Weaviate, and a couple of other ones. And he said training the large language model with corporate data, which I had asked, if that was a good alternative. He says that's very expensive. It cannot be easily updated. And he says the alternative solution is using retrieval, like to a vector database. So far, so good. As I said, let me know, dear listeners, if you think this is a topic also for us more explicitly related to industrial AI.
But why do you think it's important for an industrial application to use that?
As I say, it depends. I mean, if the idea is, and we are surely thinking along that line, that where 5 years ago, Zep said, ask your machine how it's doing or talk to the machine. But then we want to go further if we're going to expect the machine to really go into its internal, and that's, of course, where today I think the thinking is, on the left hand is, what was my revenue last month? That's today in an SQL database, some kind of like Excel, a kind of a SQL database.
Excel, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, Excel is still the most, 99% most database, so-called database in the world, I believe. That's that way. And we can all imagine somewhere there you do a sum and there's a value and you get that value back. On the right hand, if you're going to ask, maybe you're looking at an MES system. So it's more looking at how is today an MES system, maybe that is what pops to my mind now, is what today is representing the values in a production line, right? All the temperatures and all the pressures and everything. And that is the question. Yeah, there's even not a hypothesis from my side. The question is that if you are then going to be not the person who has 20 years experience in the production line, but you come in as a young person and you have been, dealing with ChatGPT already then for 5 or 10 years, or today even, these young people, they they want to do that, and they want to ask ChatGPT, tell me how the production line is doing.
Sure.
And then the question line is, are we going to find ways of doing that? Or is somebody, one of you listeners, somewhere at some point in time, maybe trying things with a vector database and say, I tried it with a vector database, and now my time series, I put them in a vector database. I'm even not sure that it's possible, So I stop here. It's only thinking where I know that on the left side, on the business intelligence side, that's what's happening. And these vector databases are really supporting and allowing the large language model to go in there and come back with an answer. So then not only the data scientist, but the person who is not close to the data can just ask the LLM, tell me what is last month's sales. So as far as that.
So this was your idea or?
My idea.
Yeah, okay.
Sometimes I have these ideas, but I'm very open about it. It's research, not more than that. It's not even research.
So you switch from podcast to research now, Peter.
No. It's just a thought. It's
Okay.
a thought that you and we should come to the person with the big thought as well. But I was going to give one more, not on this specific topic. I refer to the fact that I'm doing this data science training. I just want to, for whoever could be interested in Düsseldorf, and I want to share who's doing that together with me, because next week when I'm back, I'm going to be in Düsseldorf, and I'm going to start off this training, and I'm going to be doing the use case business models implementation, which is really an introduction to a much larger series, which in the end you get a certificate. It's a VDI data science engineer. Will be followed up by 2-day sessions by no one other than, I'm not sure that you're aware of that, Julian Feinauer.
Yes, I know.
Michael Welch and Oliver Niggemann,
Yes.
who's actually in charge of this course. Julian is doing the data acquisition, automation, IT. Michael is doing the integration into the industrial environment, and Oliver is doing the data analysis, machine learning. So, dear listener, not sure if there are still seats available. If you're interested, feel free to contact VDI. And again, as a close here, if any of you also have been thinking of what is the value of maybe of a vector database in the factory side. So I think we understand that our colleagues in the side of the finance, marketing, that they will be using that. But I'm really interested in learning from you. Contact me, Peter, at AIpod.de, and maybe we can do an interview on that topic.
Absolutely, Peter. I have one more important note, because you mentioned your course or your conference in the next week, because we are very proud, because on 24th of January, we will meet in Frankfurt at the Industrial AI event of the Hannover Messe. We are really looking forward to some very interesting guests from Beckhoff, Siemens, Festo, Zülke, Fraunhofer, and many more. I provide the ticket link in the show notes. Please come to our event in January. It's very interesting. We have small groups work together in Frankfurt on business cases, on technology, on use cases. So very interesting. Please come to Frankfurt, and we will meet in Frankfurt.
Perfect. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, absolutely. What else do you have?
We hadn't mentioned Sepp Hochreiter yet.
Yes, congrats to Sepp. He received the AI, I don't know how it's called, AI prize, or the prize of German AI award or something like that.
Uh-huh.
Yes, he was in Berlin, and he was very optimistic about his...
Very optimistic.
Yeah, very optimistic about his project to kick out OpenAI and to make a revolution on large language models.
Exactly.
You shared the post, right?
Yeah, he did an interview, and I was just thinking now why he did that interview, because the prize is from the German newspaper called Die Welt, the world, right? And Sepp, which we know from the very beginning, inventor of LSTM, 25 years, the algorithm for automated translations, other NLP applications. And then in the interview, which I couldn't read because it was behind a firewall or a paywall.
Paywall, of firewall.
Which is some kind of firewall as well.
Yeah.
In a translation, not sure if it's correct, but he said something like, "We will dump GPT away." Now, we know Sepp does, of course, make always very strong posts, so to say.
Quotes,
yeah, and I think he didn't mean like in a negative, derogative way, those stupid people or something. No, at all. I'm sure that he meant to say, as you just said, that Yen LeCun said, these large language models, they are dumb. They're stupid. They do not know the world. I'm sure that that's how he meant, and I translated it. So if it's not, please don't misunderstand what I'm sure Sepp was not saying. And then some comments on the post that I did, Martin Schiele said, hey, at least someone standing up, getting it on. Always better to act first and speak later. The other way around often leads to nothing but hot air. Well, let's see. I think I personally believe that if Sepp says something like that. Michael Köpf says at least a glimpse of boldness in the European tech market. I'm skeptical, but in this case, I would love to be proven wrong. And maybe one more. There's many there. Daniel Tramer says, good luck. Hope there will be competition in the field, but I'm skeptical. There's a lot of open source models doing great or better than GPT-4 in specific fields. So it's not about the model, but the engineering behind OpenAI, which he has to kick away, quote unquote. And that's not what he will be capable to do agilely. I'm going to stop here. I think overall there was in this feedback more skepticism. Sure. I mean, I think I was telling my wife, explaining what SAP was trying to do there. And I wasn't sharing it with skepticism, but I was putting it in a similar way to somebody else saying, he's taking on Microsoft and Google and Amazon, which are only representing, 99.9% of the world's LLM today's market, I would think. So nevertheless, of course, we have you and I, we heard about this idea from SAP in the AI in the Alps. That was 2 or 3 months ago. And we have seen him, and he's completely full of energy, and he was so strong about his idea. So having seen how SAP is thinking about what he's going to do, I think there's going to be something here. And of course, we look forward to have him and his team from the Johannes Kepler University shake up the large language model market.
Yeah, I will meet him, I think, tomorrow, because I'm once again in Linz, because I have the honor to give a speech about investment in AI and about different countries. And I will also record an episode with Sebastian Lehner about this use case with the railway track and the...
Oh, yeah. You mentioned last week.
Yeah, I mentioned last week. I will record the episode in Linz with Sebastian. I'm looking forward. And I will meet the first time Johannes Brandstätter and talk with him about Microsoft research and why he chose to come back to Linz.
Back from Amsterdam to Linz.
Yeah, back from Amsterdam to Linz, yes.
Yeah, looking forward to. Oh, you're traveling a lot to Linz these days. Not only Johannes Brandstätter, but also Robert.
Yeah.
Well, as I just mentioned, the university, Johannes Kepler, Linz, has a very, very good reputation. I suggested at the beginning, I'm going to finish off with a slogan: AI needs creative humans.
Yes.
How did I get to that one? Yes, so I was walking around this medieval Italian fishing village, and now I give special greetings to Philip Paschen at Witzenmann, who always likes to joke about Peter as the Dutch guy, going around the world in his recreational vehicle, I believe it's called in English, right? So there was a wall advertisement. It's actually from the Accademia di Belle Arte di Foggia. And later in the day, this made perfect fit. And there was a huge, wonderful image picture. I think it was what's the famous guy who said everybody wants to be famous? Andy Warhol.
Mm-hmm.
It looks like Andy Warhol, but probably in combination with a ChatGPT or DALL-E 2 or 3 or whatever. And then there was this article on VentureBeat. I'm not going to go too much into details, but in the end they say, nobody knows what this is going to do with us. Give this technology the chance. Don't get rid of people. They were referring to the same company that we just mentioned, Build, I think, sister company of the Weld, who had laid off people. So they say, try out what is going to happen, and this I think what was a perfect fit to what I saw here in this medieval city, this huge wall advertisement, and it says AI needs creative humans, and I thought it was a very interesting thought. If we are going to leave the routine work in the future to robots, to artificial intelligence, and we as humans can, use more of our brain mass and do more creative work. Wouldn't that be wonderful?
Always wonderful when you talk about your all-day experience and what you see and how you combine it with AI. Thanks, Peter. It's always a pleasure to hear that.
You're welcome.
But now let's switch to the main part. You did an interview, right?
Yeah, a couple of weeks ago with, if I pronounce it again correctly, you hear that later, with Kurt DeMaagd. And Kurt is from a company called Side Machine from the United States. And we're talking about democratizing industrial data with generative AI. So it's a spot on, again, bringing all these great topics together. Yeah, I mean, we're saying it many times, but just before we started, I sent you a couple of proposals for podcasts. That there are topics also that are not directly, related to, but generative large language models are the hot topic. And Side Machine, I think, is one of the bigger companies in the industrial analytics space who have partnered with Microsoft and are making this topic of democratizing. And it's almost like what we've been talking about before, making capabilities available to the people that until now could not. They had a barrier, almost like a firewall again, because they did not have the capability to program code. And now these people are given similar capabilities. So that's the topic that I'm talking about with Kurt.
Okay, enjoy listening. And Peter, enjoy your vacation, your trip around Europe. Best to Italy.
Thank you, Robert. My best regards to our listeners as well. And see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
My guest today is Kurt DeMaagd. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Kurt is co-founder.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, I did good. Kurt is co-founder and chief AI officer at Sight Machine. And Kurt and I are going to talk today about democratizing industrial data with generative AI. Hello, Kurt.
Good morning. How are you today?
I'm fine. Thank you very much. Please introduce yourself, Kurt, to our Industrial AI podcast listeners.
Yeah, my name is Kurt DeMaagd. As we mentioned, I am the Chief AI Officer and one of the co-founders at Sight Machine. And so we're a company that has been around for a little over 10 years now. And we've been working with manufacturers around the world on how we can help them extract their data, transform it into useful formats, and turn that into business value.
Oh, more than 10 years. Before we get into the topic of democratization of industrial data with generative AI, maybe let's talk a little bit more about your company, Sight Machine, then. So what does Sight Machine offer? Since when? We just heard 10 years. To whom do you provide and where are you based?
Yeah, so we are a manufacturing data platform. Now, of course, there are a lot of folks out there working in manufacturing data these days, but a lot of what we focus on is actually getting down to the plant floor, getting data off of all your different plant floor systems, going sometimes straight to the PLC on machines, but also historians, quality management systems, ERP, individual sensors, whatever it takes to get the data that you need to prove out value. We take that, blend it all together, and put it into a format which is easily understandable by not just your data experts, but something that even operators are able to use, understand, and start to integrate into their process. And so we've been doing this for about 10 years now, as I said, and we are based officially in San Francisco, California. I'm actually in our Ann Arbor, Michigan office, and we have folks scattered around the globe, courtesy of the modern era where it's easy to work from anywhere.
Okay, we'll come to that later as well. Okay, then, why not tell us a little bit more about your manufacturing data platform that you just introduced to us?
Yeah. So we try to get all of the data that is out there because what we've found is over the last 10, 15, 20 years, the history of things like Lean Six Sigma, which have had a good emphasis on data, have mined a lot of the sort of easy value. And the next sort of era of value is going to come from being able to look at the entire system of all of your data so that you can, bring together information for both the quality management system and what's happening directly on the plant floor and from your ERP system, which you need to solve that sort of next level of problems. And so we want to have all that data blended together. We also want to make sure it's all in real time. We work with a lot of customers where when they have data related questions, they may have to go and talk to the IT department or somebody like that. And then sure, you'll get the data in, 3 to 5 weeks or something. We want to make it so that you have effectively real time data as it's being generated, getting it streamed to the users who need it most. And then I think the third thing that really is important about what we do is we take a perspective which we call data first, which is instead of just starting with a single use case or a single problem or a single application, and then you go find the data necessary, grab it, solve that one problem, then you repeat that process where you're always application to the data, back to another application, different data set. It's much more efficient today to get all of your data organized in one easy, cleaned up, centralized repository first, and then it is much faster to build lots and lots of applications on that. So you're really accelerating your time to value there.
Data first sounds great. That's something that one of the AI celebrities, Andrew Wang, you probably know, and our listeners know, he's been driving this approach for not sure how long, but maybe you have been driving this approach for actually a lot longer than that.
Yeah, we're big fans of Andrew Yang. So yeah.
Sounds good. So why don't you share maybe one or two typical use cases around your manufacturing data platform?
Yep. So we go through actually a full spectrum of use cases. In fact, it's kind of funny. One of our most successful customers has been really focused on what I sometimes call arts and charts, which is you don't necessarily have to go all the way over to predictive and prescriptive analytics. Sometimes it's just more valuable to get your data in the platform where somebody can see and respond to it quickly, where we'll see them, just having the dashboards sitting right next to the end user, the operators on the plant floor, able to see when things are starting to go wrong immediately and to take action rather than 2 days later when it would have come up through the more traditional data gathering approach, and then you wait and talk about it in the morning meeting, things like that. And so we do some sort of arts and charts types of basic visualization, all the way over to some of our most advanced analytics. One of my favorite ones was one where we actually were blending together more traditional supply chain management data with plant floor data to solve scheduling problems. And this was actually for a large dairy processor. And we were able to take the sort of official plans that, get updated in a traditional sort of ERP timeframe of once per night. But often we're not adapting to the reality of raw materials arriving in a much slower fashion or assets on the production line going down. And so being able to quickly and immediately reschedule in an optimized format so you can either meet or at least get as optimally close as possible to the original plan. And so we can sort of blend the old school ERP scheduling with on the fly adaptation to create the sort of consistent output. So we sort of do, everything from AI down to basic visualization.
Okay, we come to the details for that. I understand that you work in different stages in your manufacturing data platform. Mm-hmm. Can you share those with us?
Yeah, so just to clarify here, when you say different stages, I could interpret that from a technical perspective of the data we process, but also a more use case oriented, which stages of the manufacturing process. Could you clarify?
Yeah, I guess it's like from the connecting to the building, analyzing, and just share a little bit of an idea of maybe of how the potential use, in the end, it's like potential users of your platform listening, how would they be using your platform?
Yeah, so we originally started off with our focus being sort of the core data transformation, saying that, recognizing the value of taking many different data sources in real time, blending those together. So kind of this, I'm going to call it middle stage of any processing pipeline of what was, say, traditionally called, ETL. Of course, these days, ETL has gotten a whole lot more complicated, but that initial sort of that data transformation stage. But of course, we don't just do data transformation because it doesn't do you any good to just have a wonderful transformation layer if you don't have all the raw data. And so that actually drew us further towards the connect side, where we work through all the connectivity going down to the PLC, talking various protocols there, being able to interface with a large number of quality management systems, MES, ERP, et cetera. So building all those connectors to get data from traditional plant floor devices. And of course, we work in an ecosystem today where many customers have already done that basic connectivity and have data up to cloud. So that means that we work with and partner with many cloud providers so we can extract the data there. So, we've had to go back to the data sources and make sure that we can collect as many different data sources as possible. And then that gets us to what I mentioned earlier, the ETL pipeline that we have to get everything blended and transformed and cleaned up in real time. And then, of course, we have to solve the next problem after that, which is after you have this wonderful data set, what do you do with it? Data's no good unless you create business value with it. And so that then led us into all of the AI, machine learning, visualization tools, other workflows just to help manufacturers. And so that does give us the sort of full end-to-end connectivity, data wrangling all the way through to the final end user applications technology stack.
Sounds great. So when then, or where does then, you're in charge of AI, where does machine learning and come in? And maybe you can give us an example of an application use case or machine learning technology example.
Yeah, so we break that up into a couple different scenarios. So one is actually on the initial ingestion side, where this is less visible often to many of our customers. But when you have very large volumes of a lot of different types of data, getting that efficiently blended together either is going to take a lot of manual work, or based on our decade of experience, we have started to develop our own algorithms to help automatically detect and arrange and organize what types of data you have so you can get it into that data pipeline, monitor it, and ensure that you have a high quality output. So one of the most important parts that we actually have is not visible to folks, where we're just using AI to make sure that you have good, clean data. Now, what more people will see is when we're using AI at the application layer in terms of how we use the data then to deliver value to the operators and engineers on the plant floor. And so we have some what we call out-of-the-box applications. These could be things like our cookbooks application, which is a recommendation tool that is looking at real-time data on the production plant floor and trying to understand where you have your current machine settings today, how that compares to ideal settings in the past, and then makes recommendations to the operators on how they could be optimally running their machines. So we have things like that, which are fairly out of the box in our application. But we also do other sort of customized analytics for very specific use cases. So, for example, we have a customer who is a magnet wire manufacturer. So magnet wire is exploding in demand right now with electric vehicles. And we're helping them with quality. And they have a lot of these cases where it's really funny to sort of talk with them, because the engineering teams often have sort of an idea. Everybody has their own sort of pet interest of what they want to work on next. But you always get then these battles between the engineers of where they should be focusing their attention. And we've been able to actually come in with this new analytic for them, which looks at their production processes and actually makes recommendations to them to say, hey, among the many opportunities you have today, this is what the algorithm says would be the most productive area, would give you the most benefit, least cost in order to do your process improvements. And so that's been very tailored to their machines, their production lines, their processes, but still based on that same underlying data platform that we provide. So we can do customized work for them too.
The first phase you mentioned, the detecting, sounds a bit like only now, a couple of weeks, old ChatGPT, forgot the actual word of it, recognizing whatever file, typically CSV, I will give it. And will tell me, okay, this seems to be like a manufacturing file with rows and columns X, Y, Z. And again, here we'll come to that later. That's the actual theme for today. But you have been doing that again, also probably for maybe since the beginning, or at least since a longer time, detecting the quality and the quantity of the data that is available.
Yeah, exactly. It's started off with us doing it all manually by hand. The customer, gives us a CSV file, or we connect to their database, or, go to their OPC server or something like that and pull the data. And then over time, you start to write a little bit of automation for it, and then you start to figure out the rough parameters to build up some algorithms, train them on your historical data, and just sort of evolves to the point where you can start to create a lot of tooling and let the machine learning handle it. Now, of course, I don't want to overhype AI. I think we're perhaps even entering an era where AI is getting so overhyped and expectations are getting so big that it could end up hurting the market. But so I don't want to overhype it, but it is pretty cool what we are now able to do with detecting and responding with machine learning.
Very good. I'll come to the OPC a bit later on as well for specific reasons. I want to stay a little bit longer here in the area. We don't want to go in too much detail of when talking about machine learning, but I saw that you are using several kinds of approaches. I saw gradient boosting. I saw support vector machines, which I have not worked with myself, but I do recognize colleagues having worked with them years ago. I haven't used the genetic algorithms myself, Monte Carlo simulation. I know also from chess engines, etc. Again, without needing to go into the details, again, who will or where is it again? We're going to come to the user of your solution later on, but is the user selecting, or is that again an algorithm? Are you running different approaches in parallel, and whatever is the best for the specific use case will be chosen? How does that work?
Yeah, a lot of it is what is the best solution. And I do think this is an important flexibility that we have, where since we aren't coming out as an AI algorithm company, really Sight Machine is about having AI ready data. We're focused on the input into those. And that gives us that flexibility to choose whichever algorithm is going to be the best fit. Now, of course, some of that, when we're creating products that are going to be out of the box for everybody, yes, Sight Machine is going to choose that. And customers don't get to just say, oh, well, we know your optimizer is an SVM. I would much rather use a random forest. So please change it. We don't do it that level. But when we're doing more of the customized applications, we do actually work and collaborate with the customer. Now, a lot of those customers are just much more on the end user focus. And they're sort of, I don't care, just give me the most accurate, the best fit. But we do also work with customer data science teams, and some of them will have a more stronger opinion about how they would like us to tackle the problem.
You already mentioned availability for the cloud. Is this exclusive partnership, and or how about edge if potential customers want so?
So with the way Sight Machine is architected, we do have edge support. In fact, we have an edge device at every customer. And the reason for that is, of course, we're pulling data from the manufacturing plant floor. So we need something down on the plant floor to push the data up to the cloud. Obviously, there's massive security implications if we were to try go from the cloud and pull. So we do have an edge device. There is, I'm going to say, a modest amount of compute there. And so we can do lightweight work at the edge. Now, it's not designed at the same level of here's a gigantic compute cluster for training a machine learning model, but we can do some lightweight work there. We're also working with other partners, though, where we may need a little bit more of a heavier edge compute availability. And so working with companies like Siemens has been the most recent one, taking advantage of some of their technology at the edge. But we still push a lot of stuff up to the cloud. Very strong partnership with Microsoft there. And that's where we try to do the heavy lifting for anything that's going to require a lot of compute. We also really try to put as much stuff up in the cloud too, so then it becomes available to everyone within the organization, not just somebody in the sort of four walls of the manufacturing plant.
Okay. So what industries do you sell your solutions then? What are your typical customers? Is it more in discrete? Is it in process as well, or both of them?
So we're not necessarily fit to just one or the other. We've sold to, everyone from, chemical manufacturing to auto companies. And so we run the full gamut. What I would say is kind of interesting. We've had the most traction recently kind of in these companies that blur the lines. So a lot of consumer packaged goods, food processing, that sort of thing, where technically there is a discrete object moving down the production line, but often at such a high volume of production that starts to look much more continuous, behaves kind of like a continuous flow process. So the fact that we can sort of float between the two is powerful for us. One other thing that I would also mention is we often work on production lines that kind of go from one type to the next, where we might have a continuous flow going to a batch process, going back to a continuous flow, going to discrete for final packaging. And so we get a lot of variety.
Now, listeners of the Industry AI podcast may have heard this before, but I actually was in charge, that's probably now 10 years ago, in that case, it was discrete, and the person opposite of me was in charge of process. And we had to decide, who's going to take where's the line? It's exactly that line that you talk about. And I think we said that as soon as fluid out of process, doesn't matter if it's chemical or Coca-Cola, as soon as it gets bottled, being packaged, as I believe, that's where we said that's where the line is. Now, it's not about sharing this information with our listeners. It's more about, does that mean that the approach in one or the other, or exactly where the process is changing, is actually different? I mean, from the perspective of the capabilities of the platform?
So that's a really good question. For capabilities of the platform, we've really tried hard to engineer and ensure that you can get the same types of insights wherever you are. But as you point out, this is a huge challenge where, for example, a recent customer that we've had is exactly the same thing, where you're going through one type of process. There is some sort of distinction kind of from the processing to the packaging line or something like that. You have to draw the line. But when you're somebody like us, where we say we are trying to give you the system-wide view, you're not just looking at packaging. You're not just looking at processing. You want to understand how packaging affects processing or processing affects packaging. You need to make sure you have those capabilities. And so we've invested a lot of time and effort into making sure that we can offer the same features and offer that same traceability across the somewhat arbitrary boundaries of the manufacturing line, or even not arbitrary, very clear boundaries. We want to make sure that you can monitor the entire system no matter what's happening.
Okay, what are the typical users then of your solution? Let's say pre-factory Copilot, which we'll talk about later.
Yeah, our typical user was either a process engineer or a quality engineer. So somebody who is, on the plant floor, clearly, but often somebody with a little bit of data savvy mindset, so that they were somebody who in the past was at least connecting to, say, the historian and looking at some basic charts, or maybe even did a little bit of introductory statistics, types of things. But, we're now starting to stretch beyond the ability to just stare at charts in their historian, and wanted to better understand and solve problems by getting that system-wide, multiple different data source type of view.
Ose, before we're going to get into the factory Copilot theme for today, democratizing industrial data, what makes you unique? What is your USP? Why should the listener consider maybe to visit your website and get a little bit more information?
Yeah, so we do have this approach to doing our data modeling, which is that data first approach, where we want to ensure that we're not just giving you some data for an application. We want this to be a data foundation, this tool which then enables many, many, many use cases. And I would say that is the key differentiator in terms of overall approach. Now, we can also go down into some of the underlying technology because we have been trying to connect to so many different types of data sources. We have a fairly robust set of different connectors to be able to extract data. We have lots of experience just working through, we'll call it the IT security process of accessing data. So as an organization, we're pretty good. Our technology stack has been designed to address common concerns from IT security groups. Our ETL pipeline is really focused on the types of data problems you would have as a manufacturer if you want to have real-time data, which can also handle a lot of out-of-order data, for example, quality samples, coming in late, things like that. So a lot of out of order, reordering of your data, stateful transformations, which is maybe just a big mouthful for things like being able to do anomaly detection or other sort of data wrangling to clean up your data as the data is streaming through. And of course, real-time blending of multiple data sources. So the ETL engine we have is pretty cool too. But as I said at the start here, I think the fundamental difference for, say, an end user is really our philosophy, our approach, the way that your data is going to come out of this with this data first foundation for other applications.
Okay, and that's where I already announced kind of at this follow-up question. You mentioned connectors, but then it's more about the OPC UA. When you talk about contextualized data foundation, and I'm involved in OPC Foundation podcast and OPC UA as an architecture. You mentioned that you are capable of reading from OPC UA data sources in addition to other connectors, whatever they are. I'm not sure, Profibus, Profinet. I think there's typical European, American market approach differences there. But how about, does OPC UA play a role and in the markets in which you are working today, or do you use your own kind of contextualized data foundation approach?
Yep. For OPC, especially OPC UA, it's music to our ears when we hear that the customer has data sources that are OPC UA. It's just so much easier to connect. OPC DA, that's a little bit more problematic, of course, given the
original,
Windows security issues and stuff like that you run into commonly. But I won't rant about OPC DA here. OPC UA, though, easy to get access to. It's got some nice security protocols in there, too, for those who care about security. Easy to explore. Like I mentioned before, a lot of what we're doing is this sort of AI work where we need to sort of discover which data fields are available. And so that ability to easily walk the sort of overall hierarchy. So if they don't have a predefined data model or data schema, we can more easily discover what is there and then help them formulate those schemas, et cetera. And so, OPC is not required for us, but certainly when we see that, it makes everybody's life a whole lot easier and really accelerates projects.
Perfect. We completely agree on that. I mean, independent of, but I've said in the past, OPC UA makes your data fly. Typically when you start. I mean, and that is again different. If maybe you're using your solution because you do exactly the same. The data first, and maybe it's not going to take necessarily whatever of 9 weeks that you have for a small project. Maybe you're not necessarily going to need the typical 80% of, do I have data? What is the quality, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I've always said, I heard you exactly say the same. If you have OPC UA, you can just start immediately by looking at the information model, and 10 minutes later, if it's an hour later, doesn't matter. You're starting. So we strongly agree there. Very good. Now let's come to, you introduced, I think July, it was a solution called Side Machine Factory Copilot, of which you say democratizes industrial data with generative AI. Can you give us a quick first introduction, please?
Yeah. So we are bringing this out as a way to start bridging the gap between who is using the data today and who could really get some of the most value out of that data. And as I had mentioned before, a lot of our end users today are the process engineers or the quality engineers or people who have been we'll call it the traditional data users, but we're trying to get that into the hands of people who are not typically thinking at that level. And one of the obstacles that we sort of saw is folks who just kind of look at the data system and say, I don't really know how to use that. I don't understand that. That's not really my thing. And so how do we actually change this data or change the interface into a way that everybody can feel very interested and able to ask questions? And so sort of turning it into this, here's an expert here that you can just type and ask a question and get an answer. And one of the really cool things that we have found beyond doing things like more traditional UI user experience research is when you can work with something like a ChatGPT type of interface, suddenly people are realizing, hey, I can take this question and do something really silly with it, like, have it reframe the answer like a country music song or talking like a pirate or something like that. And suddenly people are thinking, oh, hey, you wrote it as a country music song. Can you also write it as a rap song? And now, obviously, if you're doing that with your manufacturing data, it's not directly going to create value, but it suddenly flipped the script where instead of somebody saying, oh, data, it's not for me, I'm intimidated, I don't want to touch that, to they're actually wanting to get in and starting to play with their data. And it just breaks down those barriers that were in place in the past.
Very good. Yeah, I completely hear what you say. So it's almost implicitly means, well, but the question still is, who are the users now? I mean, what is it that you're targeting? Is a new solution, understand? The same as before, or typically more other? I mean, you mentioned before the process engineer, quality engineer, they are probably still, your target audience, but will other kinds of users be using this solution as well?
So we currently have two different users in the early testing and use of this. One are the folks who are commonly not using the data in the first place, is often operators, maybe on the second shift, who aren't necessarily interacting with the engineering team, folks like that who don't have that expert to go talk to and weren't using data through the traditional interfaces. But now they can just go and ask a question by typing a question into this interface, as opposed to having to understand how to use all the different site machine tools. And so we're opening things up to people who weren't using it, such as operators on the plant floor. The second use case that we're seeing is actually the same traditional engineering users, where maybe there was somebody who had to come in an hour early to pull down this data, aggregate, synthesize information to be ready for the morning meeting. Well, now instead of having to do this all as a manual process, it can much more easily go through and just aggregate the information, sort of write the report for you so that you're ready right away for that morning meeting. So you can kind of more efficiently synthesize information.
Right. So it's still the traditional plus, so you're extending your target users, actually. You mentioned typing. Yes, I can imagine. How about talking? How about talking to talking to the plant, so to say? And if we talk about talking, how about languages? In the past, have you been providing English only? I mean, how about other languages, Spanish, German, French, etc.?
Yep. Excellent question, because we have been working on both the talking side and the multilingual side. So today you can actually do text to speech if you have it built into, well, of course, most computers these days, you can just hit a button and do text to speech and then do that with our interface and it will reply. So that is an option, or it is kind of neat. You can do that right on your phone. If you go to a Copilot application, just kind of go there, hit the button, ask the question. So you can imagine being, say, in the car, you want to be properly hands-free, but you want to ask a quick question about, is this happening right now? Technically, you could do that. Hopefully, you're keeping your eyes on the road too, but that is now an option. That said, we have not gone super deep. There have been a couple side conversations with other vendors who do things like the walkie-talkies for the plant floor sort of thing. Can we integrate with that? So there's some interesting opportunity there that I see in the future, but we don't have anything deployed today. What though also is really cool is the multilingual parts here. For example, the magnet wire plant that we've been working with, I mentioned before, is in Mexico. We have, therefore, a lot of folks who are going to speak Spanish. And with our interface, one of the first steps it does is checks which language it is and handles that appropriately. So if you wanted to ask a question in Spanish and also make sure it's replying in Spanish, that is fully supported today. And so it's still something that we are testing to make sure it works, since we are relying on OpenAI, on ChatGPT to do that translation. And sometimes, these language models are not necessarily trained on manufacturing jargon. And so you run into some issues, even like within English, if you ask it about performance could be a generic statement about, hey, how is stuff working? Or it could mean like capital P performance in an OEE type of sense. And so making sure that things like that translate properly. And so we're still working through a little bit of that to make sure that the edge cases of manufacturing jargon translate correctly. But today you can, do something like ask a question in Spanish and German and French and whatever language you may want to try.
Muy bien, sehr gut. Yeah, and of course, I mean, the topic of the languages is in relation to the large language models is a topic for itself, where we as, let's say, a global community, independent of manufacturing, probably want to make sure that we're going to continue to have, not sure how many we have, 150, 200, probably even more dialects, maybe 1,000, that they're not going to die out because we've been doing everything. And that's the next question. Everything has been trained on English mainly, not exclusively. So, but your solution then typically is what? Is then also, as you mentioned, your partner, Microsoft, OpenAI, has been trained, has a large language model, I assume, as a basis, but has been trained in addition on specifically customer data as well?
Yeah. And so it's trained on a combination of customer data and then, of course, the core large language models. So specifically, we use GPT-4 underneath the hood. Now, I should, of course, mention here that although we feed it a lot of data from customers, that is all done sort of locally within a deployment and through a combination of, model tuning and prompt engineering so that none of that data then goes into anything that can be retrained on ChatGPT someday. So obviously, you're not going to just type in something a year from now and suddenly discover that your confidential information is somehow leaked out. So we do take that part very, very, very seriously. But yeah, a lot of our effort then goes into how do we take that general purpose large language model and fit it with the necessary data and know-how of manufacturing to solve these problems.
Very good. Yeah, we've all heard about the colleagues from Samsung who probably were the first, at least we heard about it. Something else happened with him there. We don't want that to take place. Now, your colleague, co-founder, John Sober had a quote, AI can't work with raw factory data. AI needs to fully contextualize data. You want to comment on that statement from John?
Yeah, there's a lot going on in that statement. Biggest thing that we are really trying to address when we are making our data AI ready is you can't just take a whole bunch of CSV files, Parquet files, whatever you have, shove it into an algorithm and just hope that it magically figures things out. So a lot of what we're doing when we're getting our data AI ready is trying to blend things together into a coherent format so that it has the necessary context to minimize the spurious correlations, to clean up the types of data anomalies that are going to trip up an algorithm, et cetera. And then also make sure that we are doing the analysis in a way that takes advantage of that context and can be the best fit to the final output. So certainly we can dig into some of those topics a little bit more, but fundamentally, if you go back to the early sort of big data era, there was sort of this idea of, hey, just get lots and lots of data, shove it into a neural net, and magic is going to occur. And I think, within a year or two, people started to figure out, oh, wait, that's nothing more than a spurious correlation engine.
Yeah, right. Didn't take me 10 years. It was
exactly
10 minutes. Yeah, right. It was sounded very much like at that time marketing speak of specific companies. Kurt, thank you very much. Tell us a little bit more about your company size, maybe global representation. You already mentioned 1-2 pieces. Not sure. Maybe you're looking even for new colleagues. If so, where and what capabilities should they bring?
Yeah, so we are a global organization. It's kind of hard to be in manufacturing without being global these days. So I believe we have representation around the world, around the time zones. In total, we are about 160 people. And that is heavily based San Francisco for our engineering team. A lot of our, we call them the outcomes team, but sort of data engineers, data architects, continuous improvement, Six Sigma types of folks are based in Michigan. We have a nice little cluster of folks in the UK, but then as I mentioned before, we're also just scattered around the world wherever we find the talent.
Sounds great. Coming to a close. So what then is, as far as you see the status of this democratizing industrial data with generative AI in different parts of the world? I mean, I believe you're one of the first, if not the first. I feel happy to confirm that. Is it the US only today? I mean, at the exception of the fact that you are global, is what do you see happening in China, Asia? Have you seen things in Europe, UK you just mentioned? And from your perspective, how is then Gen AI going to change the industrial AI world over the next 5-10 years?
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting because we have everything from variable regulatory rules, which are going to be changing a whole lot as people are really becoming, I'm going to say it's aware of how much data AI consumes and the potential risks. I think AI has been, these risks are nothing new, but suddenly ChatGPT brought it into a format where people, individuals can start to see that. So obviously anything that, I speculate about is subject to regulatory issues that may be coming up in the future. But let's just assume that we continue to have a pro-AI regulatory environment. I think a lot of what we're going to start to see is a little bit more appreciation for what it can and cannot do. It has been really interesting to see, even with things like ChatGPT, how people describe it has been so different. Where in the past, you would have, for example, seen somebody write a blog post about some AI for helping them make investments in the stock market. And they would talk about their algorithm and how it's helping make decisions. But it's fascinating now they talk about, I gave ChatGPT $20,000 to make an investment, as though ChatGPT is, I'm going to walk down the street to the bank and, make an investment. And so this personification of AI is really interesting to see how that's going to change here in the next, few years. Are people actually going to look at even, for Sight Machine, are they going to sort of look at our Copilot as an expert that they are talking to, or are they just going to treat it more like a traditional chatbot that you may have had for customer service or something like that for the last 10 years? And so we want it to be as democratized, as feeling sort of human as possible to break down those barriers, but at the same time, recognizing that there are limitations to this. You can't just ask it anything and it will magically figure it out. We have to kind of put those skills in underneath the hood to make sure it has the data, to make sure that we're controlling the way it knows how to answer it, to ensure the accuracy, things like that. And so a lot of what we're trying to figure out right now is how to balance that, ensuring people feel comfortable that this is your expert partner, but not missing out on the fact that it is not actually a human in the background that somehow magically is omniscient and can answer everything. And so we're doing a lot of work there trying to understand that.
Kurt, thank you very much. Closing off on this notification of personification, which I interpret as, like a personal assistant who will be helping not only the people you said before, these specialists, but also the people who have been a lot further away from the data. Thank you very much for that. So listeners who want to get in touch with you can best do so. You suggested on LinkedIn, it's Kurt with a K, K-U-R-T, and then there's a space, D-E-M-A-A-G-D. Or do you pronounce it as DeMaagd, you suggested? Otherwise, if you, dear listeners, if you have any questions, comments, as always, please send a short email to peter@aipod.de. Great, you stay with us so far. Looking forward to have you with us again. And Kurt, thank you very much. Have a nice day.
Thank you. My pleasure, Peter.